The first voicemail arrived at 11:52 on a Saturday morning, while I was sitting on a porch 430 miles from home, watching a shrimp boat idle up a river I'd known for exactly 15 hours. By 11:58, there were 31 missed calls on my phone. Ryan, Vanessa, Sandra, Brooke, Ryan again. A number I didn't recognize with a Tampa area code. Ryan. I let the coffee finish before I listened to the first message. Mom, my son's voice. Ragged, whined noise behind him, a car door somewhere. Mom, the key doesn't work. The key doesn't, there's a note on the door. Who the hell are the Nakamuras? Mom, call me back. Who are the Nakamuras? I set the phone face down on the porch rail. Across the water, the shrimp boat's outriggers came down slow, like a bird settling its wings, and my sister June came out with the pot and refilled my cup without asking a single question, which is the entire reason God gives some of us sisters. To explain why my son was shouting a stranger's name into my voicemail on a Saturday morning in June, I have to take you back 6 weeks, to a text message that arrived at 7:14 on a Tuesday in April. My name is Carol. I'm 63 years old. For 31 years, I was an escrow officer at Gulf Shore Title in Bradenton, Florida, which means I spent 3 decades sitting at the quiet end of a closing table watching what money does to families. I have watched brothers stop speaking over a boat slip. I have watched a widow sign away a house at 9 a.m. and her daughter-in-law pick out counter samples by noon. You'd think all that would have made me smarter about my own family. It didn't. It just made me very, very good at paperwork. Hold that thought. My husband Frank taught drafting and shop at Riverview High for 33 years. He was the kind of man who fixed the neighbors' mailboxes without being asked and kept a bird feeder outside the kitchen window that he defended from squirrels like it was the Alamo. 2 years ago, his heart stopped in his sleep. 3 weeks into a retirement, he'd been sketching on legal pads for a decade. At the top of every one of those pads, underlined twice, the cruise. 7 days. The whole family. The Caribbean. He priced it every winter and never booked it because Frank could spend $400 on anyone but himself. So last spring, I booked it for him. 7 days out of the port of Tampa. 12 people. 2 suites and 4 balcony rooms. I put $21,800 on my visa, and every reservation sat under one name. Mine. 12 people. And here's the roster, because it matters later. My son Ryan and his wife Vanessa. Vanessa's mother Sandra, her sister Brooke, and Brooke's boyfriend of 4 months, all flying in from Ohio on tickets I bought. Vanessa's aunt and uncle and 2 cousins from Columbus. A friend of Sandra's named Deb, added in February because Deb's been through a lot. I never met Deb. I paid for Deb's balcony. And the cruise was just the visible part of the iceberg. For 2 years, I'd covered the lease on Vanessa's white Nissan Pathfinder, $644 a month, just until Ryan's promotion. The promotion came 8 months ago. The payments never left my account. Their phones were on my Verizon plan. Every month, $500 moved from my bank to theirs to help with the house. Automatic. Like rent I paid on a home where I was welcome exactly as long as the transfer cleared. When their water heater died last January, I wrote the check the same afternoon. When the wedding ran over budget 3 years ago, I quietly covered the flowers, the band, and the open bar, and I stood in the back of the reception in my navy dress while Sandra gave a toast about the village that raised this beautiful couple. The village. That's a nice word for one woman with a checkbook. Frank used to say you can't overspend on family. I believed him. In my defense, so did he. The text came in at 7:14 on Tuesday, April 21st, while I was standing at the kitchen window watching a cardinal bully the finches off Frank's feeder. Plans changed. You're not coming on the cruise. Vanessa only wants her family there. Hope you understand. I read it twice. Then I set down my coffee and did something I'm not proud of, which is that I laughed, alone, in an empty kitchen, and the laugh came out wrong, flat and short, the way a sound is wrong in a room that used to have 2 people in it, because my son had forgotten one small detail. Every cabin, every ticket, every person on that boat, including her family, was floating on my visa. That afternoon, I called Ryan. Vanessa answered his phone. She has always answered his phone. I used to think it was closeness. Don't make this weird, Carol, she said. It's a bonding trip. You'd change the energy. I'm not family? You know what I mean. You're extra. 63 years old, and my daughter-in-law had just filed me under luggage. Is your mother still going? I asked. Obviously, she's my family. And who's paying for your family, sweetheart? The pause lasted maybe 2 seconds, and then her voice went to ice. Wow, you're really going to count pennies right now? This is exactly why nobody wants you there. In the background, I could hear my son laughing at something on the television, not at me, at the TV, which was somehow worse. He was 10 feet from a phone call deciding whether his mother was family, and he was watching a rerun. He didn't say one word. Enjoy the trip, I said, and hung up. I told myself that night it was wedding planning stress, 3 years late. I told myself Vanessa was overwhelmed with hosting her Ohio people. I texted Ryan directly around 9. Can you call me this week? Just us. He replied at 11:40 p.m. with a thumbs up emoji. A thumbs up. 29 years of packed lunches and science fair poster board and co-signing his first apartment. And I got the same reply he'd give a pizza tracker. The call never came. That was the first thing I noticed and explained away. It would not be the last. The second thing happened 4 days later, and it started, as most disasters in my life have, with me trying to be responsible. I opened my banking app on Saturday morning just to confirm the final cruise payment had processed. It had. And then, because 31 years of escrow gives gives you a twitch, I kept scrolling. Then I got a legal pad, one of Frank's, the good ones. And I did something I had never once allowed myself to do. I ran the numbers on my own family. 24 Pathfinder payments, $15,456. 33 months of help with the house, $16,500. 2 phone lines, 26 months, $3,240. 1 water heater, $2,300. 1 wedding overage, flowers, band, open bar, $11,400. 1 dream cruise, $21,800. 70,696X. I wrote it at the bottom of the page and looked at it for a long time. Just north of $70,000, and the running total of phone calls my son had made to me since Christmas that weren't a request was easier to calculate. It was 0. I told myself the ledger was ugly math, the kind of thing bitter people do. Frank's voice in my head. You can't overspend on family. I drafted a calm, generous email suggesting that now that the promotion had landed, maybe they'd want to take over the car payments as a fresh start. I read it twice. Then I deleted it because my hands had started doing something strange while I typed, a fine tremor, right hand only, like the beginning of stage fright. My body had finished an audit, my heart was still refusing to certify. The third thing was older, and it only became evidence in hindsight, the way a photograph only becomes a clue after the crime. In January, Ryan had sent me an email, an actual email, formatted, which should have been my first red flag, because my son communicates exclusively in fragments and GIFs. Subject line, estate stuff, not urgent. Inside, 3 polite paragraphs suggesting we add him to the deed of my house to avoid probate down the road. He said Vanessa's brother-in-law worked in insurance and said it was what smart families do. He said, and I'm quoting, "It wouldn't change anything day to day." At the time I'd written back, "Let me think about it, honey, and let it drift, the way you do." Now I sat with my legal pad and remembered Thanksgiving, 5 months earlier. Vanessa standing in my kitchen, running 1 acrylic nail along the edge of my counter like she was checking a rental for damage, saying, "This house is a lot for one person, Carol. You ever think about something more manageable?" And I remembered the letter. Every spring for 9 years, the Nakamura family, Dan and Keiko, 2 little kids, renters 2 streets over, had left a handwritten note in my mailbox. Always polite, always the same. If you ever think about selling, we'd love the chance. No pressure. Your yard is our kids' favorite on the walk to school. Frank used to pin them to the fridge. He'd wave at their kids from the driveway. This past Easter, Vanessa found the newest one on the fridge and read it out loud at my dining table in a sing-song baby voice, wiggling her head. Yomu 2011, your yard is our kids' Faru 2011 Vorit. God. Vultures. She dropped it on the table like it was sticky. Don't worry, Carol. This house stays in the family. At Easter, I'd heard, we love this house. In April, sitting with a legal pad that said 70,696 Rs, I heard it correctly for the first time. This house is already ours. You're just still in it. My hands were cold. It was 81 degrees outside. I called Ryan that evening and asked him straight, the deed email in January. Tell me that wasn't about the house. Tell me that was really about probate. There was a muffled sound, a hand over a phone, and then Vanessa's voice not even bothering to be far from the microphone. Tell her we're busy. We're swamped right now, Mom, Ryan said. It's not a thing. You're making it a thing. Failed attempt number 2. I was keeping count now. The escrow officer in me had woken up, and she has never once in her life lost count. The 4th thing came from Ellen. Ellen has lived across the street for 26 years. She's a retired ER nurse, which means she has 2 speeds, dead calm and sit down, we need to talk. And on Tuesday, April 28th, she flagged me down at the mailbox using the second one. Carol, back in March when you had that cardiology follow-up. She said it like a chart note. Vanessa was here. She walked a woman through your backyard. Blazer folder, taking pictures of the lanai. I figured you knew. Knew what? They were out there 20 minutes. The blazer one kept saying comps. Vanessa said something about after they update the kitchen. Ellen watched my face and then said gently in her nurse voice, you didn't know. I went inside and opened the Ring app, and God bless whichever grandchild of Ellen's talked me into that camera 2 Christmases ago. I scrolled back to March 12th at 2:15 p.m. While I was 40 minutes away having electrodes stuck to my chest, my doorbell camera recorded Vanessa letting herself into my house with the key she'd insisted on having after Frank died. In case something happens to you, Carol. Followed by a woman in a white blazer carrying a leather folio. They were inside for 22 minutes. On the way out, the blazer woman took a wide photo of my front elevation, the way I have watched 1,000 listing agents do it, feet planted at the property line to get the whole roof line in. I sat down on my own porch step because my legs suggested it firmly. There was no rationalizing this one. There was no version of this that was probate or stress or energy. This was a walkthrough. I'd spent 31 years on the paperwork end of walkthroughs. I know what one looks like. Somebody was getting my house ready for market, and it wasn't me. The 5th thing I found myself 2 days later, and I want to be honest, I went looking. The guest room in my house is Vanessa's project. 2 years ago, she redecorated it, sage paint, rattan headboard, a dresser she chalk painted in my garage. For when we stay over, which had happened twice, I never opened those drawers. It felt like her space, which, looking back, tells you everything about how the house had already been quietly redistricted while I was still paying its taxes. On Thursday, April 30th, I opened them. Under the liner paper of the bottom drawer was a manila folder. Inside, printed comps for my address. 3 pages, $568,000 to $590,000, pulled in February. A business card. Kristen Dale, Coastal Premier Realty, white blazer in the photo. And underneath the comps, glossy and cheerful, 2 brochures for Sun Harbor Senior Living, resort-style memory support, with a pink sticky note in Vanessa's fat, looping handwriting. Tour after cruise? The brochures rattled. It took me a second to understand that was because my hands were shaking hard enough to make paper make noise. I sat down on the rattan bed in the room my daughter-in-law had colonized, in the house my husband died in, and I finally solved a small, stupid mystery that had been irritating me since Christmas. Why I, a woman who does the crossword in pen and still climbs a ladder to clean her own gutters, had been receiving assisted living mailers addressed to me by name for months. Someone had put me on a list. Marketing departments don't find you by accident. Somebody fills out a form. Here's what I didn't do. I didn't cry, and I didn't call my son, and I didn't drive to their house and put the folder on their kitchen island, even though I stood in that guest room and lived that scene in my head down to the dialogue. Because 31 years of closings teaches you the first rule of the table: never tip your position before the ink dries. I photographed every page under the good lamp. I put the folder back under the liner paper exactly as I'd found it, corner to corner. I straightened the chalk-painted dresser, went to the kitchen, filled Frank's bird feeder, and poured myself a glass of the Pinot Vanessa always calls cute. Then I opened my laptop and started making a list of a different kind. The cruise sailed in 32 days. As it turned out, that was 25 more days than I needed. Monday morning, May 4th, 9:00 a.m., and I was the first appointment at the law office of Diane Okafor, 22 years in elder law and estate practice in Sarasota, a woman with reading glasses on a chain and the bedside manner of a very kind guillotine. I put everything on her conference table: the ledger, the deed email, the ring footage on a thumb drive, the photos of the folder, the sticky note. She went through it without a word, in the order I'd tabbed it, and when she got to the Sun Harbor brochures, she looked at them for a moment over the glasses. "Mrs. Hendricks," she said, "I want to be precise, because precision is what you're paying me for. Nothing in this folder is a crime yet. Florida Statute 825. 103 covers financial exploitation of the elderly, and what I see here is a pattern that's walking in that direction. The deed request, the unauthorized walkthrough, the isolation framing, the placement brochures. If you were 86 and foggy, we'd be having a very different meeting. You're 63 and sharp, so instead of a prosecution, what you have is an early warning, a generous one. Most people never get to see the folder. So what do I want?" I asked. "Distance," she said, "and a clean title," in that order. That week she did what she called boring miracles. My credit got frozen at all 3 bureaus. My accounts got new beneficiary designations. Ryan came off as my healthcare surrogate. My sister June went on. The will got redone. I'll tell you now, because it matters to how you judge me, that my son is still in it. He's my son. He's just no longer in charge of anything, which is the distinction Diane made sound like the difference between loving someone and handing them the wheel. "And the house?" she asked at the end. "The house," I said, "is where it gets fun." On Wednesday, I called Marcus Webb, 17 years a broker on this coast, 400-some closings, at least 100 of them across the table from me back when I was the one sliding the pen. Marcus is the only realtor I know who returns calls during dinner. "Off market," I told him. "Quiet, as is, and it closes before June 6th. He whistled. "I can have 3 cash offers by Friday, Carol. You know I can. Investors are circling this zip code like vultures," I said. "No, I've already got my buyer. I just need you to keep it clean and keep it quiet." Thursday evening, May 7th at 6:40, I walked 2 streets over with 9 years of springtime letters in my hand, and I knocked on a rental's front door. Dan Nakamura answered in scrubs. He's a physical therapist at Blake Medical. Keiko teaches 3rd grade at Palmasola. Behind him, 2 kids' bikes lay dropped in the hallway at the exact angle kids drop bikes, and something about that undid a knot in my chest I didn't know was there. "Mrs. Hendricks?" he said, alarmed, because in 9 years I had never once knocked. "You wrote me letters," I said. "Did you mean them?" Keiko appeared behind him with a dish towel. The kids' heads came around the corner like periscopes. "Everyone," she said. They'd been saving for 9 years. They had $65,000 and a pre-approval that any Florida lender would take 6 weeks and a pound of flesh to honor, which was 5 weeks longer than I had. So we didn't use a lender. Sale price $565,000. Dead center of Kristen Dale's own comps. Thank you for the research, sweetheart. With the Nakamura's $65,000 down, and me carrying a note on the remaining $500,000 at 6% over 30 years. Owner financing. 31 years of watching banks say no taught me exactly how to say yes. Diane papered it. Marcus shepherded it. On May 11th, we signed the contract at my kitchen table, and Keiko cried, and Dan shook my hand for approximately 1 full minute, and their daughter Mia, who is 6, asked me if the bird feeder came with the house. "It does now," I said. Tom Garrity came next, certified financial planner, 26 years, a fiduciary, which Diane pronounced the way other people say board-certified surgeon. He took the proceeds plan, the note payments, Frank's pension, and my Social Security, and reorganized my life on 1 sheet of paper. When he finished, he tapped the bottom line. "You just gave yourself a raise, Carol. About $2,900 a month every month from a family that eats dinner together." He clicked his pen. "None of which is anyone's business but yours." There was one more list, and I saved it for the week they sailed, because timing, like escrow, is a discipline. The Pathfinder lease had 1 name on it. Mine. Vanessa was an authorized driver on my insurance, nothing more. Diane confirmed what I already knew. The car was legally mine to possess and surrender, and drafted drafted a one-page letter for the glove box in case anyone official ever asked. The Verizon lines, scheduled to drop at the end of the billing cycle, June 3rd. The $500 monthly transfer, deleted, 2 clicks, gone. And the cruise itself. Here's where I'm going to disappoint some of you. I never touched the cruise. I thought about it. I sat with my finger over that phone number more than once, and $21,800 buys a lot of sitting, but the cruise was Frank's dream, not Vanessa's. And canceling it felt like letting her decide what happened to the last thing he ever wanted, so I let it sail. I made exactly one call to remove my visa from all 6 cabins' onboard spending accounts, which I had set up myself back when Carol handles the boring parts was said at family dinners like a compliment. They'd have to hand over their own cards at the check-in desk. I figured they wouldn't even notice. They noticed. They sailed on Saturday, May 30th, out of Tampa. Sandra posted the send-off Friday night. 8 matching pink t-shirts fanned out on a hotel bed. Cruise day tomorrow. Family only. Blessed. 200 likes in an hour. She tagged 11 people. Every single one of them was on my receipt. Family only. Cute. What followed were the 6 longest days of my life. And I want to be honest about them, because the internet loves a woman of steel and I wasn't one. Monday, the movers came. 6 hours, 2 men in a truck. 34 years of a marriage fitting into one truck with room left over, which is either a scandal or a mercy depending on the hour you think about it. Tuesday at 6:15 a.m., I took the spare key and June drove me to the Port of Tampa parking garage level 4, where the white Pathfinder sat with a Ship Life decal Vanessa had put on my leased vehicle, and I drove it to Coast Nissan of Bradenton and surrendered it. Early termination ran me $1,900. I paid it smiling. The service manager, a kid about Ryan's age, said, "Somebody's going to be surprised." And I said, "Several somebodies." And he decided not to ask. Tuesday night, Ryan called from the ship's Wi-Fi. Not to apologize. I want that on the record. 6 days into my son's silence, the phone rang from the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, and I stood in Frank's emptied closet holding the one flannel shirt I'd kept, and I watched his name on the screen, and I let myself believe, for exactly 4 rings, that he'd felt something across all that water. The voicemail. "Mom, hey, something's wrong with the onboard account. They made Vanessa put her card down and it declined at the spa. It's super embarrassing. Can you call the cruise line? Also, the port charged us for parking somehow." A pause. Vanessa's voice near the mic, not lowered at all. "She's doing this for attention." Then Ryan, tired, "Whatever. We'll deal with it when we're back. You're being really immature, by the way." Immature. From a deck chair I paid for. I didn't sleep Wednesday. Thursday, the closing nearly came apart. The Nakamura's windstorm coverage stalled in underwriting at 4 p.m. because Florida insurance is God's way of keeping escrow officers humble, and for 18 hours, the whole clean, quiet exit wobbled on a binder. I sat up at 2 a.m. Friday with my thumb over a drafted text to Marcus. "Maybe we should pause." And I walked the empty living room where Frank's chair used to be, and I asked the room out loud if I was burning down my family. The room said what empty rooms say, but the fridge still had one thing on it. 9 years of springtime letters, and the newest one, the one Vanessa had read in a baby voice. I deleted the text. The binder landed at 8:51 a.m. We signed at 10-84 pages. Gloria Sandoval, mobile notary, 15 years, who wet signs at kitchen tables and calls everyone un. My hands shook until page 12, and then, I swear to you, they just stopped, the way weather stops. Wire confirmed 10:42 a.m. Deed E recorded with Manatee County at 2:17 p.m. Friday, June 5th. I left the feeder full, put the ziplock on the front door with blue painter's tape, hid a set of keys under the lanai mat for Dan and Keiko, and drove north with June at 1. I cried once, at the Georgia line, for about 4 minutes, for Frank, for the Finches, for the boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat on this exact highway. Then I stopped, because Beaufort was 3 hours out, and June had queued up 7 hours of Fleetwood Mac. The ship docked Saturday at 7:05 a.m. I know what happened next, the way you assemble anything after a storm, from Ellen, from voicemails, from a Tampa police officer's extremely patient phone manner, and eventually, months later, from Ryan himself. At 8:52 a.m., they reached level 4 of the port garage, sunburned, towing wheeled luggage, and found an empty parking space where a white Pathfinder should have been. Vanessa reported it stolen. The Tampa officer ran the plate, listened to dispatch, and delivered the following, which Ryan can now recite from memory. "Ma'am, the vehicle wasn't stolen. It was retrieved Tuesday and surrendered by the leaseholder." Vanessa said that was impossible. She was the leaseholder. The officer looked at his screen and said the 11 worst words of her year. "No, ma'am, you're not on this lease. You never were." Their phones, meanwhile, had been dead since Wednesday, which they'd blamed on the ship. Sandra's still worked. Sandra pays her own bill. I'd like that noted. The woman has her qualities. So Sandra summoned the Uber XL $61 plus surge, and 8 people in pink shirts rode an hour to Bradenton in a silence Ellen later described, secondhand from Brooke, as church, but bad. At 11:10 a.m., they stood on my porch, and Vanessa's key, the emergency key in case something happens to you, Carol, went into a brushed nickel deadbolt it had never met, and did nothing. Something had, in fact, happened to me, just not the kind she'd bought brochures for. Then they found the Ziploc, and the note in the blue ink and the block escrow officer handwriting I have used for 31 years of documents that hold up Ryan, the house sold Friday. The closing was clean. I should know. I've done 4,000 of them. The new owners take take possession Monday, so these locks are theirs, and so is the yard, the lanai, and the bird feeder. You know them, actually. Dan and Keiko Nakamura, the vultures. It turns out they never wanted to pick anything apart. They just wanted a house where their kids could stay put. I liked that in a family. The Pathfinder went back to Coast Nissan on Tuesday. If you're confused how that's possible, read the lease. The first name on it was never yours. Neither was the phone plan, or the $500 a month, or the water heater, or the open bar. The cruise you just took was your father's dream. I paid every cent, and I don't regret $1 because he'd have wanted it to happen even without me there. That's the difference between your father and your wife. He never checked the guest list of his generosity. Don't worry about forwarding my mail. Nothing at this address has my name on it anymore. Mom, the extra one. Ellen was watering her hibiscus across the street because of course she was. She reports that Ryan read it twice, the way I'd read his text, and that Vanessa sat down on the front steps of a house that wasn't hers in a pink shirt that said family only and stayed there for some time. At 9:15 that morning from the port, Sandra had posted the cruise album. Blessed. Family is everything. By noon, the comments were turned off. Ellen's book club had found it. Ellen's book club takes no prisoners. The calls started at 11:31. I answered the 32nd at 11:58 on June's porch with fresh coffee. Is something wrong, sweetheart? What came out of my son for the next 90 seconds was not language so much as weather. The house, the car, the note. You sold my childhood. Then the phone changed hands mid-sentence the way it always did, and Vanessa arrived at full altitude. You're insane. You know that? This is elder abuse. We're calling a lawyer. My mom knows someone. Careful, honey, I said. My lawyer has a folder with your name on it, and you do not want to find out what's in Exhibit C. You left it under the drawer liner. Sage room. Your project. Silence. Long, expensive silence. Somewhere behind her, Sandra asked what folder. Enjoy the pictures from the trip, I said. I hear the weather was perfect. And I hung up, and the shrimp boat sounded its horn out on the river. And June, who had heard every word from the kitchen, brought out the pot again. Ryan called one more time. Alone. Sunday morning at 8:04 from Sandra's number. That call was quieter. That call I answered on the first ring, because he's my son, and being done paying for people is not the same as being done loving them. Where are you? He finally asked after the anger ran out of road. Somewhere I'm not extra, I said. He was quiet for a while. Then, Mom, the assisted living stuff, I never saw a folder. I believe you, I said. And I did. And that was the saddest part of the whole conversation. That's the problem, baby. There's a lot going on in your name that you've never seen. Start reading. It's September now. I rent a white cottage in Beaufort, South Carolina, 2 blocks from June, in the town where Frank and I honeymooned in 1985 with $200 and a borrowed camera. On the first of every month, a payment lands from the Nakamuras, $2,998, regular as tide. In July, the memo line said, kids love the yard. In August, it said, feeder wars, Cardinal is winning. I framed neither. I thought about framing both. Nobody was arrested because nobody needed to be. And Diane says the folder stays in her file cabinet, doing its quiet work as a paperweight on everyone's better behavior. Vanessa's lawyer, it turns out, was Sandra's cousin who does timeshare disputes. And one letter from Diane's office, a single paragraph mentioning pattern evidence and exhibits A through F, ended that conversation before it billed its first hour. The consequences were never going to be handcuffs. The consequence is a Tuesday. The consequence is a car payment, a phone bill, and $500 a month that now come out of the same place everyone else's does. I hear from Ellen that the Pathfinder was replaced with a used Kia, and I genuinely hope it runs forever. In late August, a letter arrived through Diane's office, which is the only forwarding address anyone has. Ryan's handwriting, 4 pages. The first page was an apology, and it was a real one. I've been read enough fake ones to grade on sight. The second page began, Vanessa thinks, and I folded the letter back up at those 2 words and put it in Frank's old tackle box, where I keep the things I'm not finished with. Maybe at Christmas, maybe not. It's the first December in 30 years I get to decide, and I find I'm in no hurry, the way you're never in a hurry with money in the bank. Here's what I know now that I didn't know at 7:14 that Tuesday morning. Frank was half right. You can't overspend on family. You can only overspend on people who aren't. And the invoice for finding out which is which came to $70,696 and a house. And it was the best money I ever spent because I got me back with the receipt. I bought a new bird feeder my first week here, hung it off the porch where I can see the river. The birds found it by Tuesday. They go where the seed is. Most everybody does. The difference is the birds never once called me extra.